Hello, I'm continuing with the third video on the Aliza Bazak article. I would be happier if more of you would watch it. I noticed the first video was watched by 13 people, but the last one was watched by 0 people. So it doesn't make me happy to sit here and make videos that nobody watches. Okay. So the question is the renewal of Rabbeinu Tam's distancing. What was the need for it? Why was there a need for new sanctions in Israeli law? And basically what we're trying to say is that the new laws mimic the social situation in the world at the time of Rabbeinu Tam. So actually there is no new law. It's just a modernization of the same laws. So here's the first factor is modern transportation. In the past, when a husband was ostracized in the community, leaving home and moving a distant place away was quite a challenge. I'm going to add a piece here. I think there was also a piece of anti-Semitism. There was nowhere to go because the Jew was rejected everywhere. So where is he going to go? Nonetheless, there was a strong incentive to comply to rabbinic rulings and divorce his wife because there was an issue. Where is he going to go? Today, it's much easier for a husband to get on a 747, leave Tel Aviv or Melbourne, and settle in Los Angeles. So we needed something that should bridge that gap. And of course, social media was one of those things. The second modern development is the role that society plays in the life of an individual. And we're getting back to that with social media again. Focus is on protecting the rights of individuals and minorities, dignity, liberty, well-being, freedom of social pressure is simply not as important as it once was. In fact, those who reject societal norms are often admired. And then there is the issue of the laws of the Knesset. Why did the Knesset have to pass these laws, restraining orders, etc.? He could be barred from leaving the country, prevented from receiving or renewing a passport, a driver's license, going to the bank, etc. So the situation kind of repeats itself, that the laws that were impacted on us in 1,000 years ago are kind of coming back. They impede his mobility. New sanctions are intrinsically related to the medieval sanctions. Rabbinical courts in Israel state explicitly in various judgments that when they impose Rabbeinu Tam sanctions, they're acting as a halachic Beit Din. But when they impose new sanctions, they're acting both as a religious court and as an enforcement of powers by virtue of halacha. If that resonates with you, you could use those texts in your writings. So, not only did the Batei Din in Israel make extensive use of the new sanctions based on Rabbeinu Tam sanctions, but surprisingly, the use of the new sanctions not only didn't replace the use of the old, but even caused an increase in their imposition. 2 decades or so later, in 2016, we see new form of Rabbeinu Tam's sanctions, shaming of divorced refusers. The Beit Din Hagadol in Israel ruled that public shaming for husband refusals to give get, in particular by a guy whose name was Dr. Oded Gez, was permissible. They ruled that it's permissible. The Beit Din allowed his wife to publish his name and picture, call on his employers to fire him, asked the public to refrain from giving him honors, etc. Okay? In the synagogue, the rabbinical stated that these sanctions and accompanying shaming derived from Rabbeinu Tam's. In other words, the Beit Din Hagadol in Jerusalem argued that this is not a new law, This is just an extension of Rabbeinu Tam. Okay? And thus, the shaming of divorce refusals on social network in reliance on a consent instruction of a rabbinic court has become a relevant tool in fight against get refusals. Technological advances in the 21st century have further expanded the possibilities. Shaming through social network turns the world into a small global village, a kind of single community, etc. Therefore, the improvements in mobility afford him almost no advantage because social media can catch up with him. The Jewish community too reclaims its powers by means of shaming. Jewish society in many places that information reaches makes its voice heard clearly, declaring that it disavows the refuser. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Long-term implication, shaming in 21st century goes beyond the confines of medieval community. This is a point against shaming. Namely, if you shamed somebody in their village, so how many people were there in shul? 10? 20? Sometimes they even had to get together communities for holidays to have a minyan. The communities were so small. But now, if you put something on Instagram, the whole world sees it. Is this what Rabbeinu Tam had in mind? Okay, so this is a huge magnitude, and this guy, Dr. Oded Gez, we meet a third guise of sanctions of Rabbeinu Tam. This was a new form of sanctions imposed by rabbinical court against get refusals who are imprisoned. Rabbinical court asked prison services to withhold. So what they said to somebody, oh, you want extra kosher food, badatz, Beit Din Tzedek, extra kosher food. So they said, if you're so religious that you need extra kosher food, you would obey the rules that the Beit Din put up for you. And if you don't need to obey the rules of Beit Din, we don't need to serve you extra kosher food. So the prisoners who refused the get had restrictions put upon them by the Beit Din. Namely, they expect the Beit Din expressed their displeasure against a husband who refuses a get. The Beit Din stated, according to Rabbeinu Tam's sanctions, the public is permitted not to fulfill the most basic halachic obligations towards him. For example, in the prison in Israel, where there are many religious Jews, unfortunately, there is a class, a shiur going on that they teach either Talmud or the Torah reading of that week. So they say to him, if you don't obey the rabbis, why should we allow you into the class? So we have another example. So no kosher food. It's not kosher, it's not extra kosher. Sanctions of this type, the Beit Din has extended the withholding of benefits from the refusal in Rabbeinu Tam's sanction to prisons, as well as withholding granting various rights, especially religiously based rights. Do not pride yourself on what are you being so religious? Why are you pretending you're religious? You're not obeying the laws of the Torah, so we don't have to give you the extra religious foods or Torah classes or minyan or whatever. Another law was passed by the Knesset, etc. These sanctions and all the milestones mentioned below are based on Rabbeinu Tam, and they draw their power from the statement at the end of the list of the sanctions. Now, it's an important statement here, and I pointed it out, I think, at the previous video. I'll read it with you, and here. And they shall add restrictions. This is Rabbeinu Tam, that the Jewish courts shall add restrictions at will upon every person if he does not divorce. the grants dayanim, this grants dayanim of future generations the power to employ measures that are regarded as pressure, but not force, not coercion, because that would invalidate the get. They believe could lead to the granting of the divorce. In addition to the three guises of Rabbeinu Tam sanctions, various Israeli guidelines and laws have been added to in recent years, allowing the imposition of old and new sanctions on additional populations, which expand the scope of the original sanctions. Here too, the initiative for the laws came from the rabbinic system, not adding the outside courts, the non-Jewish courts. For example, Knesset passed a law authorizing the rabbinic courts to provide a chained woman, an aguna, all over the world. Even if neither partner is an Israeli citizen, they're allowed to change, and get refusal is now in Israel. So the halacha went a long way. Public shaming to pressure the refusing husband. While I believe that all these measures maintained the original intent of Rabbeinu Tam, which was to isolate and shame the refusing husband, I will focus on publicly shaming the husband as a means of applying pressure. Shaming is perhaps the most powerful form of sanction made possible by technological advances. Shaming stretches Rabbeinu Tam sanctions to the extreme, has the vast and immediate effect, creating a strong impression remain etched in the public's mind. In addition to advantages, it also has disadvantages. The first use of public shaming came in Dr. Oded Gez's case, when he refused his wife a get in 2016. We already spoke about that. And now let's look how that had a bad effect. This case was one of the most difficult ever heard by the rabbinical courts in Israel. The saga of Gez is well known. A refusing husband, unwilling to give a get to his wife, he began in a district court in Jerusalem or in Petach Tikva, referred to the Supreme Court in Jerusalem, and then sent back to the court. It was going back and forth. They had no idea how right they were when all their efforts to persuade him to grant a divorce failed. The Beit Din evoked a new sanction, shaming measures discussed above. It stated that these sanctions and accompanying shaming were derived from Rabbeinu Tam, sanctioning rendering it more relevant in the contemporary context of social media. We will stop here.